was just ridiculous. It's not often that you're watching the WNBA or that I'm watching it and I'm like, wow, I've just never seen this before.
Buddy. Imagine a league so terrified of its own superstar that the commissioner triggered the largest fan revolt in women's sports history with one reckless decision. Because today, the WNBA didn't just stumble into chaos, it detonated it. If there was ever a moment when a sports league willingly lit itself on fire, it is this one. Because what unfolded inside WNBA headquarters today was not a controversy, not a disagreement, not a misunderstanding, it was a catastrophic, self-inflicted implosion sparked by a commissioner drunk on control, a fan base pushed to breaking point, and 3 players standing together while the entire system cracked and collapsed around them in real time. It begins with a simple truth the league refused to accept: when you corner the biggest star you've ever had, when you threaten the very players keeping your brand alive, when you suffocate instead of support, you don't just risk backlash, you guarantee a revolution. And that revolution erupted the moment 200,000 fans, then 210,000, then 235,000, then over 250,000 in hours, officially announced a boycott of the 2026 season, sparking a panic inside the WNBA offices so intense that Commissioner Cathy Engelbart was seen storming out, face drained, phone ringing non-stop, sponsors screaming, and Adam Silver himself reportedly furious. But this firestorm didn't begin with a meeting or a press conference. It began with a leaked players group chat that exposed the exact moment the league crossed the line from leadership into dictatorship. The messages claimed that Cathy Engelbart warned Caitlin Clark to stop participating in outside events, specifically golf, but it didn't stop there. She allegedly extended the threat to Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull as well, suggesting suspensions, suggesting benchings, even floating the word termination, a word no professional athlete should ever hear simply for living a normal life outside the court. And then came the sentence that lit the fan base on fire. Engelbart supposedly told someone in leadership that Clark should be grateful for the money she makes off the court, as if her historic impact wasn't already well documented, as if the league didn't survive the last 2 seasons on the tidal wave she brought in from Iowa, as if she didn't deliver the highest ratings the WNBA had ever recorded. Clark wasn't just the rising tide. She was the tide. She was the economic engine, the cultural phenomenon, the reason every record market exploded, and the reason millions of new fans tuned in. So when those messages leaked, fans didn't get annoyed, they revolted. Reddit exploded, Instagram exploded, TikTok detonated into chaos, and the most viral post, "Suspend Caitlin and we suspend the WNBA," hit 1.2 million views in minutes, not hours. Fans remembered everything: the fake fouls, the targeted hits, the on-court cheap shots, the outrage when Caitlin was benched for protection, the warnings about her golf outings, the policing of her off-court life, the jealousy disguised as critique, the resentment bubbling all season. This wasn't random anger. It was accumulated, generational frustration crashing down at once. Inside the Fever facility, the mood shifted from confusion to unity to shock as Caitlin, Sophie, and Lexi watched the numbers climb in real time: 200K, 210K, 235K, 250K, a movement so unprecedented that even seasoned reporters didn't know how to react. Caitlin, normally calm, whispered, "They're doing this for us." Sophie took her hand. Lexi wrapped her arms around both. And for the first time, 3 players realized that the entire foundation of the league was realigning under their feet. At that exact moment, the WNBA's corporate towers were drowning in crisis. Sponsors didn't wait for statements. They didn't wait for clarity. They didn't wait for negotiations. They called immediately. Some pulled money. Some froze contracts. Some threatened to walk forever. One sponsor rep said the sentence that broke the league's spine: "This isn't a league problem. This is a Cathy problem." That line, repeated across email chains and phone calls, echoed through the offices like a death sentence for Engelbart's leadership. The league's stability was evaporating in real time, the financial heartbeat collapsing under the pressure of a commissioner fighting her own stars. And then came the moment no one saw coming, when the boycott count hit 210,000, Adam Silver, usually calm, composed, strategic, snapped. He walked into the office, slammed a binder on the conference table, and demanded an explanation. Why was Caitlin being threatened? Why were players being warned about golf? Why was the commissioner creating enemies out of the athletes she should protect? Engelbert mumbled excuses. Silver cut her off. His message was simple: fix this or step down. And then, in a twist so unbelievable it sounded scripted, the assistant commissioner whispered something to Silver, and without saying another word, he shook his head and walked out. Not a meeting, not a debate, just pure legendary frustration exploding through a room suddenly frozen in silence. Meanwhile, players across the league weren't talking, they were watching. Phones buzzing. Notifications flooding. Group chats erupting. And inside Fever HQ, Caitlin, Sophie, and Lexi sat together as the boycott count rose again: 220k, 235k, 250k, numbers no WNBA event had ever reached, not in attendance, not in engagement, not in anything. The fans weren't mad. They were finished. They were taking back the league they felt had mishandled, misunderstood, and mistreated the very player bringing them in the door. This wasn't a casual protest. This was a reckoning. A generational shift. A refusal to watch a commissioner suffocate the growth everyone waited decades to see. And as the numbers rose, the WNBA office fell apart. Employees were crying. Executives were locking their doors. Sponsor inboxes were overflowing. Phones were ringing non-stop. The HQ didn't look like a professional sports league building, it looked like a financial emergency room. Chaos. Panic. No leadership. No plan. Only crisis. And by the end of the day, the estimated boycott count hit 1 million when including families and groups signing together. 1 million. In a league that averaged far less viewership for regular games just a few years ago, this wasn't a warning. This was a message carved in stone. And somewhere in that building, Kathy Engelbert, who once stood confidently at press podiums, now sat in an empty office, door locked, chair vacant, refusing to speak, refusing to come out, watching the league crumble under decisions she made with full control and zero foresight. The WNBA didn't just lose money today. It lost trust. And in sports, trust is the one currency you can't rebuild once fans decide you broke it. The players knew it, the sponsors knew it, the fans knew it, and now, even the NBA knew it. All because one commissioner allegedly threatened the 3 players she should have protected: Caitlin, Sophie, and Lexi. The 3 who united. The 3 who refused to back down. The 3 who unknowingly sparked the biggest fan uprising the league had ever faced. And if today proved anything, it's this: the fans own the league now, not the offices, not the executives, not the boardrooms. The fans took back the WNBA with the only weapon leagues fear: unity. Picture this: a commissioner collapsing under the weight of her own arrogance while the very fans she underestimated unleash a nationwide revolt so powerful it shatters every illusion of control the WNBA thought it had, because this wasn't backlash, this was a full-scale mutiny. There comes a point in every league's history where the people in power finally face the storm they created, and for the WNBA, that moment arrived with a force no executive, no sponsor, no political ally, and certainly not Kathy Engelbert could stop, because when millions of fans unite behind 3 players, Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, and Lexi Hull, you don't get a debate, you get an uprising. And the second this boycott went public, the league found itself in a financial chokehold so tight that even veteran analysts admitted privately that they had never seen anything of this magnitude in women's sports. Inside corporate boardrooms, the panic was immediate and blunt. Executives realized the fans were done being polite, done being patient, done watching the commissioner antagonize the very player who resurrected the league from years of stagnation. This wasn't about criticism. This wasn't about rivalries. This was about survival. The leaked messages had already exposed everything: Caitlin being told to stop playing golf, Sophie being warned about outside events, Lexi being threatened with punishment for simply supporting her teammate, and what made it worse was the unmistakable tone of the messages. They didn't sound like leadership, they sounded like intimidation. They sounded like the commissioner believed she could control behavior off the court, dictate players' hobbies, police friendships, and micromanage their lives. And that delusion detonated the fan base. The reaction wasn't slow. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't mild. It was volcanic. Fans poured onto social media demanding Engelbert's resignation. Families signed boycott pledges. Season ticket holders demanded refunds. Entire online communities, people who didn't even agree on anything else, aligned behind one message: if you suspend Caitlin, we suspend the WNBA. That sentence became the rallying cry that tore through every platform, and the numbers kept stacking: 200K, 210K, 230K, 250K, 300K signatures by nightfall. The fans weren't confused, they were insulted. They watched Caitlin take hits on the court, watched her get shoved, hacked, elbowed, watched players celebrate knocking her to the ground, watched officials swallow whistles, watched commentators dance around controversy instead of confronting it. And through all of that, Caitlin never complained, never flinched, never lowered her standard. Yet somehow, she was the one being disciplined. She was the one being warned. She was the one being policed for golfing. That contradiction lit a fire under millions of fans who had been quiet for years, because suddenly everything made sense: the jealousy, the resentment, the secret club mentality, as analysts described it, the players who didn't want new popularity unless they were the ones at the center of it. But the fans weren't having it. They didn't care about petty ego battles. They cared about the future of the sport. And the future was Caitlin Clark. Sponsors realized this faster than the league did. Within hours, messages started flooding the commissioner's inbox: paused payments, pulled campaigns, frozen partnerships. One company bluntly said, "Without Clark, your league is commercially unviable." This wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning shot. Another emailed, "We're not investing in dysfunction." Another wrote, "This is not a league issue, it's a commissioner issue." And the harshest one came from a brand that had invested heavily in Clark-driven markets: "If she's gone, we're gone." These weren't idle threats. These were corporations with budgets, schedules, commitments, and profit expectations. They don't gamble on instability. They don't fund chaos. They don't subsidize bad leadership. And in Engelbert, they saw failure, fragility, and a leader who had lost the support of her own consumers. Inside WNBA HQ, the atmosphere turned apocalyptic. Employees were crying, mid-level executives were whispering about resigning, internal chats were freezing from overload, and directors were scrambling to draft statements no one believed would calm anything down. The servers were overloaded with sponsor emails. Phone lines jammed. Staff members were being told not to leave the building until the crisis team established a communication plan. But no plan existed. There was no public relations strategy that could spin this. You cannot threaten the most popular athlete in the sport's history and expect fans to shrug. You cannot intimidate players into silence and expect sponsors to clap. You cannot ignore the millions Clark brought into the league and expect those millions to disappear quietly when she's disrespected. The WNBA had never seen a meltdown of this scale, not during lockouts, not during player disputes, not during any controversy in the last decade. This was the first true mass fan rebellion. And the worst part? Every minute the league hesitated, the boycott count grew. It broke past 300K, then 350K, then approached 400K after major sports influencers amplified the story. Reddit became a live protest headquarters. TikTok users created montage videos calling for Engelbert's resignation. Instagram Reels showed fans burning jerseys, not because they hated the players, but because they were refusing to support a league run by incompetence. Some fans mailed their season passes back to the WNBA offices. Others recorded videos explaining why their daughters would not watch next season. This wasn't a casual disagreement. It was the biggest trust collapse the league had ever faced. Meanwhile, in the Fever training facility, Caitlin, Sophie, and Lexi were stuck in a surreal moment. They didn't ask for this. They didn't want a rebellion. They didn't want a boycott. They wanted respect. They wanted fairness. They wanted the freedom to be athletes with lives, hobbies, personalities, families. But the league pushed them to the wall, and the fans pushed back harder. As notifications exploded on their phones, there was a mix of shock and unity, Caitlin staring quietly at the rising numbers, Sophie tightening her grip on her hand, Lexi leaning in as if to say, "We're not alone anymore." This wasn't a trio of teammates. This was the center of a movement. They didn't lead it. They didn't spark it. They simply existed as symbols of everything wrong with the league's leadership. The fans took the wheel, and nothing could stop them. What made the rebellion even more intense was the resurfaced commentary from analysts describing the darker side of the discourse, race being injected into fan arguments, sexuality being weaponized in social media wars, jealousy disguised as critique, envy masquerading as league culture, and the toxic whisper that some players felt Caitlin got too much attention. But instead of protecting players from escalating hate, instead of de-escalating tensions, instead of leading, Engelbert took aim at Clark's off-court life. 1 million people boycotting a league that averaged far fewer viewers than that just 3 years ago. This wasn't protest. This was numbers powerful enough to erase sponsorships, collapse revenue projections, ruin marketing budgets, and threaten the upcoming CBA negotiations that players desperately needed for better pay, better travel, better conditions, and better support. The irony was brutal. Engelbert's attempt to control players might have triggered the very lockout players feared, because if sponsors walk, money walks, and if money walks, negotiation leverage disintegrates. And by midnight, the scene inside the WNBA offices looked like a corporate disaster movie. Silence, tension, lights on in every conference room, staff whispering, executives refreshing boycott trackers in disbelief. Engelbert's office remained locked, her chair empty, her position suddenly the most unstable job in American sports. The league wasn't losing viewers, it was losing trust, credibility, reputation, fan loyalty, and financial stability, all because one commissioner threatened the wrong 3 players at the wrong time. The WNBA had been given the greatest gift in its history, a superstar who brought millions of new fans, and instead of nurturing the moment, it attacked it. And the fans responded by taking back the league with a force Engelbert never saw coming. Imagine a league so rattled, so shaken, so terrified of its own fans that the very foundation of women's basketball trembles overnight, because when the people finally rise, no commissioner, no executive, no PR team, and no corporate shield can stop the collapse that follows. There is a moment in every downfall where the truth becomes impossible to ignore, and for the WNBA, that moment hit like a meteor when the boycott numbers crossed the 1 million mark and fans made it clear that this wasn't anger, it was revolution. What began as a reaction to leaked messages spiraled into the largest sports fan uprising in modern history, a storm built on betrayal, frustration, and years of feeling ignored by a league that didn't understand the power of its own supporters. And as the fire spread, one name sat at the center of the chaos, Caitlin Clark. The star who revived the league, preserved ratings, sold tickets in every city, and brought in global attention now stood face to face with a commissioner who treated her not as a blessing, but as a burden. And that single mistake ignited a rebellion so large that not even the NBA could put it out. Inside league headquarters, desperation turned into fear. Staff moved through the hallways with trembling hands, whispering about resignations, job security, and whether the league would even survive the off-season. Screens plastered across the media room displayed real-time boycott count spikes, each number climbing like a warning siren signaling the end of an era. What was once a bad PR day transformed into a crisis that swallowed sponsorships, split fan bases, and shattered whatever trust remained between leadership and the public. It wasn't just the veteran fans. It wasn't just Clark supporters. It was parents, teenagers, former athletes, retired coaches, new fans, casual watchers, entire families who felt insulted by the commissioner's reckless decision to threaten Clark, Sophie, and Lexi for living their own lives. The irony in all of this is that Caitlyn never wanted to be the villain, the martyr, or the catalyst of a rebellion. She wanted peace. She wanted space to heal. She wanted to live like any athlete, enjoy golf, enjoy time off, enjoy normalcy. But Engelbert's fixation on control, her belief that intimidation would maintain structure, her inability to adapt to Caitlyn's global fame, those miscalculations poured gasoline over a league already struggling with internal jealousy, fractured locker rooms, and public criticism. And when the fans saw that the WNBA wasn't protecting the biggest star it had ever produced, they realized that fighting back was the only option left. This rebellion wasn't built overnight. It began during the season, when the world witnessed countless moments that should have been addressed long before the scandal erupted. Fake fouls. Targeted hits. Players celebrating when Clark was shoved. Silence from officials. Silence from leadership. Silence from the commissioner. It created an environment where bitterness replaced unity, where hostility overshadowed growth, where players who should have been building the league together were instead locked in a culture of envy and resentment. And the league did nothing, until fans stepped in and forced a reckoning. As the boycott intensified, sponsors took aggressive action. These weren't minor companies. These were massive, global brands that invested millions in advertising, events, player partnerships, and broadcasts. Suddenly, those brands stopped returning calls, paused funding, held emergency meetings, and drafted exit options. One sponsor wrote bluntly, "We cannot invest in a league that fails to protect its top." The silence that followed was far more terrifying than any reprimand. Staff exchanged worried glances. Executives froze. They all knew that if the NBA lost faith, the WNBA would collapse under the weight of its own dysfunction. Meanwhile, in Indianapolis, the atmosphere inside Fever HQ was the complete opposite. It wasn't chaos,